Vicksburg National Military Park was established in 1899. At the start of the Civil War, Confederates controlled the Mississippi River. They fortified strategic river points like Vicksburg. It had riverfront artillery batteries and a ring of forts whose 172 guns guarded all of the approaches from land. As the war progressed, federal naval and military forces gained control of more of the Mississippi River, fighting south from Illinois and north from the Gulf as they closed in on Vicksburg. President Abraham Lincoln knew Vicksburg was the key, and he said, "The war can never be brought to a close until that key is in our pocket." He knew how valuable this town on a high bluff was to the United States. The Visitor Center offers interesting exhibits, helpful rangers, a movie, and a gift shop. Outside the Visitor Center, you can see the types of cannon that saw action during the fighting at Vicksburg. Confederate artillery made Vicksburg's fortifications impregnable and closed down the Mississippi River to Union traffic, while Union cannon terrorized Confederates and held them captive inside their own defenses, forcing their final surrender. A 16-mile tour road guides visitors through the park. Along the tour, red metal markers pertain to Confederate lines, while blue markers pertain to Federal forces. Across the park, more than 1,300 monuments and markers have been placed to memorialize the soldiers who fell here. Vicksburg was a Confederate stronghold on the bluffs above the Mississippi, the nation's main highway for commerce all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. Powerful cannon on the bluffs commanded the river, while attack from the east would require ascent to the top of that bluff, which was protected by gun pits, forts, trenches, and redoubts. The Union's General Grant wanted to overwhelm the Confederates and ordered an assault on May 19, 1863, led by Major General Sherman. They had to negotiate a 6-foot-deep, 8-foot-wide ditch before attacking a 17-foot-high stockade wall made with logs. Even with supporting artillery fire, several attempts by Union troops were easily repulsed. The Illinois State Memorial, dedicated in 1906, is the park's most impressive monument. 47 steps commemorate the 47 days of the siege of Vicksburg. 60 bronze tablets line the interior of the memorial and bear the names of all 36,325 Illinois soldiers who participated in the Vicksburg campaign. Despite their bloody failure on May 19th, Union forces resumed attacks on Vicksburg by bombarding the city with artillery the night of May 21, and for another 4 hours the morning of May 22. Union soldiers rose up from trenches and assaulted Vicksburg, with the lead units supplied with ladders to ascend the fortification walls. On May 19th, the 55th Illinois Infantry was pinned down by enemy fire and running out of ammunition. Orion P. Howe, a 14-year-old musician, volunteered to run back and get more. On the way, he was wounded. He found General Sherman and received the needed cartridges. For his heroic run, Howe became one of the youngest recipients of the Medal of Honor. Federal assaults against Vicksburg on May 22nd were unsuccessful. Stevenson's brigade advanced in 2 columns against the redoubt, but their attack failed when they found their ladders were too short to scale the fortifications. Quinby's division advanced a few hundred yards, but then halted when its generals engaged in confused discussions. Tuttle's division suffered so many casualties that General Sherman told him, "This is murder! Order those troops back!" Union casualties for the day totaled 502 killed, 2,550 wounded, and 147 missing. Grant's unsuccessful attacks gave him no choice but to put Vicksburg under a siege, to outcamp the enemy, and to incur no more losses. A new problem confronted the Confederates. The dead and wounded of General Grant's army lay in the heat of Mississippi summer, and the odor of the deceased men and horses was overpowering, and the wounded were crying for medical help and water. Grant first refused a truce, thinking it was a sign of weakness. Finally, he relented, and the Confederates held their fire while the Union recovered the wounded and the dead on May 25th, with soldiers from both sides mingling and talking as if no hostilities existed. Later in the siege, Union troops tunneled under Vicksburg fortifications and packed the mine with 2,200 pounds of gunpowder. The explosion blew apart the Confederate lines on June 25th, and then an infantry attack followed the blast. The 45th Illinois Regiment charged into the 40-foot wide, 12-foot deep crater with ease, but were stopped by recovering Confederate infantry. The Union soldiers became pinned down, and defenders rolled artillery shells with short fuses into the pit, with deadly results. The Confederates held fast and forced the Union troops to withdraw from the crater. Once again, Vicksburg's defenses had held firm. Meanwhile, Union ironclad warships also fired cannon at the bluffs of Vicksburg from the river below. Vicksburg National Military Park preserves the only remaining ironclad of its type in existence. The first use of an ironclad gunboat in 1862 made every wooden warship in the world obsolete. The USS Cairo Museum tells of its amazing history. The USS Cairo was sunk on the nearby Yazoo River in 1862 when it struck a Confederate mine. No lives were lost, and the crew was rescued by nearby vessels. Sand and mud preserved the ship until it was raised in 1964 and salvaged for display in Vicksburg National Military Park. The so-called Brown Water Navy had the task of taking control of the Mississippi River from the Confederacy. It was a diverse fleet of all kinds of boats, including ironclad gunboats like the USS Cairo, that were capable of navigating shallow inland waters. Most of the Union soldiers on the USS Cairo had no naval experience. Almost half were immigrants. They were black, brown, and white from different occupations with different languages, all fighting for the same cause. Visitors can thoroughly explore the ship. The pyramid-shaped structure on top is the pilot house. And this is the view from inside the pilot house. Visitors can take a fascinating self-guided tour through the ironclad. Ironclads like the USS Cairo came equipped with 13 heavy cannon. It took a crew of 6 men to position and fire each gun. Iron plates protected the ship from enemy fire. Behind the 2.5-inch thick plates were white oak planks up to 25 inches thick. When the iron plates took a hit, their wooden backing kept them from shattering. A ton of coal per hour had to be shoveled into the Cairo's fireboxes when the ship was underway. The burning coal heated 5 large boilers where steam was produced to power the ship. A long drum connected to the top of the boilers collected the steam and delivered it to the engines. A huge 22-foot diameter, 15-foot wide paddle wheel drove the ship. The paddles were simple wooden planks that could easily be replaced by the boat's carpenter. The wooden paddles are now missing from what you see here. Enemy fire was unlikely to disable the paddle wheel because the ship was protected by iron plating. Wooden rudders in the stern of the ship steered the gunboat. They were controlled by cables attached to the wheel in the pilot house. From the river, Union gunboats lobbed over 22,000 shells into the town during the siege, and Army artillery fire was even heavier. Over 500 caves were dug into the yellow clay hills of Vicksburg for protection. The civilians did their best to make them comfortable with rugs and furniture and pictures. Because of the citizens' burrowing, the Union soldiers gave the town the nickname of Prairie Dog Village. But despite the ferocity of the Union cannons, fewer than a dozen civilians are known to have been killed during the siege. During the siege, Union troops dug ditches all the way around the city and began to move them in closer and closer to the Confederate defenses. With their backs against the Mississippi and Union gunboats firing from the river, Confederate soldiers and citizens alike were trapped. Confederate sharpshooters could only harass the Union troops as they slowly dug trenches up the hill. Confederate General John Pemberton commanded his army of 29,000 men in Vicksburg. He held out hope that reinforcements from General Joe Johnston could bring relief with his troops from central Mississippi, but his army was too weak to get there. Nevertheless, Pemberton held on. He was a Northerner by birth and was probably influenced by his fear of public condemnation as a traitor if he abandoned Vicksburg. States have been dedicating memorials at Vicksburg since 1903. A federal law that created Vicksburg National Military Park authorized each state with troops at Vicksburg to build a memorial. Northern states began building at once, but it took decades for southern states to achieve the level of prosperity that they enjoyed before the war. As a result, many of the southern state memorials were built much later and have more modern artistic styles. The Mississippi Memorial was one of the first memorials built by a southern state. It was built in 1909 and it stands 76 feet tall. After 47 days under siege, the battle could only end in surrender. Inside Vicksburg, General Pemberton faced harsh realities. 1/3 of his troops were too sick to fight, with scurvy, malaria, dysentery, and diarrhea. Their drinking water was contaminated. Citizens had resorted to slaughtering mules and cats, and shoe leather became a last resort for nutrition. Pemberton asked Grant for surrender terms. Grant did not want to feed 30,000 prisoners of war or transport so many men north to prison camps. He offered to let Vicksburg's defenders go home. if they promised they would not fight again against the United States. At this spot, Pemberton accepted the terms. On July 4th, 1863, the Confederates handed over their guns, and Union troops marched victoriously into the city.